We're going to turn our attentions to the international newspapers now. And at the moment, Bashar al-Assad still seeming as though he hasn't followed through on the Kofi Annan plan, although Kofi Annan obviously still hoping that he will. Elena, what's next for Syria in the papers?
Well, Foreign Policy magazine in the US says it's safe to assume Bashar al-Assad is not going to follow through on that plan. They say it always looked like an outsized possibility. So now where can the UN go from here? Firstly, there's a meeting of G8 foreign ministers that starts tomorrow, in which they say Russia or even China might be persuaded to change their position and actually back a UN Security Council resolution calling for Assad to step down. That would change everything for Assad, who relies heavily on military support more than anything from his Russian allies. If that doesn't happen, what else can the West do? Well, they could arm the rebels. They say that might be the least bad option, rather, although that runs the risk of causing violence to escalate and inflaming sectarian tensions. Then there's the possibility of an international force, a peacekeeping force, moving in there. The magazine says it would be disastrous for Western troops, American troops, to do this, but maybe Turkish troops, the country's nearest neighbour, backed by Gulf countries' finance, might be able to do it without inflaming sectarian tensions, although really all options are risky.
And the other big top news story of the day, as far as the paper is concerned, is Rick Santorum finally throwing in the towel in the US. What are the American papers making of it?
Well, the Boston Globe says Romney has finally fulfilled his ambition of the last 8 years when he originally started running to be Republican candidate. The thing is now, he's got to completely change his image around. Having run a campaign based on fairly hardcore conservatism and a number of quite radical policy changes, he's got to move himself back into the centre ground and become again that Massachusetts moderate that Newt Gingrich so much attacked, the man who won the role of governor of Massachusetts back in 2002 by winning over centrist voters. He's got to find that Romney again, perhaps not too easy after that campaign that he spent playing to the Conservative base. But the Boston Globe article reckons that he can, in fact, change the tone of his campaign and still have a real contest with Obama for those centrist voters. Nothing has yet been decided. Obama's re-election is certainly not to be taken for granted. Over at the Washington Post, though, they say those Conservatives are going to make his life very difficult over the next few months. Firstly, they've forced him in all kinds of unpopular policy positions, like opposing taxes on the rich, in order to try and win them round. Then they're not likely to rally behind him later because they still don't really like him. So he's going to have to pick a very Conservative vice presidential candidate to shore up the Republican base, and it's still very likely that those Tea Party favouring Conservatives could derail his campaign.
And the next one you pulled out, it's a fascinating story. It's incredibly complicated, I have to say. It involves a disgraced Chinese politician, his wife, murdered British businessman. It's all over the British papers, isn't it?
It is indeed. Look at the front of the Times. Britain's murder exposes power struggle in China is their headline this morning. There it is. Now, The Guardian is probably the best explanation. Now, briefly, British businessman Neil Haywood found dead in China. Now, a senior functionary, the former governor of Chongqing, has been pushed out of that job. He's now been dismissed from the Communist Party, and his wife's been arrested for supposedly being involved in the British businessman's murder. Now, is it political manoeuvring in China actually behind all of this, asks The Guardian. Now, Bo Xilai, who's the former governor involved, was kind of leading a particular current of Chinese politics, a very sort of left-wing current, neo-Maoist, they call it, where he invested very heavily in public spending, helping people buy homes and things like that in the Chongqing area. Also brought back a lot of Cultural Revolution-style iconography, propaganda, the Maoist-era slogans, even 1960s videos being taught to children in schools. So lots of leftists in China think that this murder charge has been completely trumped up to try and push him out of power. But the New York Times explains in an article that this might be a good thing in the long run because this is really just a sideshow, they say, to a great big political debate that's going on in China. Bo Xilai was expected to be elected to the Politburo committee of just 9 leading functionaries later this year. In October, that happens. But now it looks like reformist voices, those who are more capitalist, if you like, who want to reform China's economic system and perhaps even allow people to have a little more freedom, might be coming out on top ahead of the current that he represented.
It's a fascinating story, isn't it? Elena, thanks a lot. That's Elena's look at the international papers on France 24.